300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. I have to ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game. I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on a jam-packed Wednesday morning. The MLB playoffs are just continuing to get even better and better. Some big news out of the Ball brother family with LiAngelo Ball. I'm going to touch on that in just a moment. And of course, the John Gruden resignation and much more is coming up. But we start with the NBA with a developing story that has just continued to kind of befuddle all of us. The more layers and additional layers that keep getting added to this Kyrie Irving and his vaccination status. And now it's reported that the Philadelphia 76ers, who have also been in the news in their own right for similar yet different types of problems, are apparently not interested in Kyrie Irving whatsoever. Amid all this trade buzz surrounding an Irving for Ben Simmons swap, at the moment, the Philadelphia 76ers have said at this moment in time, we're not interested whatsoever. So here's what we do know. What we know from this situation is that Ben Simmons has actually returned to the 76ers' facility. He had to return yesterday. He got a COVID test that's mandated by the NBA upon your return. So we know, even though he doesn't want to be there, and he's made those intentions very clear, he did return back to the facility to get tested. And obviously this encounter and this greeting, because his representation with Rich Paul has met with 76ers brass, his return is going to be very awkward, and it will likely be an untenable situation because of the toxicity that will be in the air between Ben Simmons and Embiid and Doc Rivers and the entire roster. But at the end of the day, in the short term, he's back with 76ers brass. So that's number one. The second thing we know is that Kyrie Irving isn't eligible to play for the Brooklyn Nets. And the Nets have come out and said so. They said that yesterday. They announced that Irving is not going to be playing or practicing at all until he is deemed eligible to play, a.k.a. until he gets vaccinated and is permitted under New York's local mandate. So we know, and first of all, that was the absolute best action, the best course of action for the Brooklyn Nets to take. It was the only course of action at this moment that was appropriate, because at the end of the day, KD and James Harden had to sign off on this, and it was a joint agreement. They reached a joint conclusion. Hey, we need to think long-term. What's in the best interest of the Brooklyn Nets? This is the best interest. This is the best move. And at the end of the day, the Nets don't revolve around Kyrie Irving. The Nets are bigger than Kyrie Irving. The universe's axis doesn't revolve around Kyrie Irving. And so to ask the 15 other guys on the roster who've already made sacrifices to now accommodate this man even more, that's just unfair. It's not right. Just because Kyrie Irving has applied self-induced restrictions on what he's allowed to do doesn't mean that the other 15 players have to oblige. And so I understand. That made perfect sense for the Brooklyn Nets to say, hey, listen, you're either all in or you're all out. We can't have this half in, half out committed thing. That's number 2. Number 3 that we know is that there were reports that came out of Kyrie Irving's camp that stated that if he was traded, he would threaten to retire, basically quashing any, if not all, potential trades. And obviously, if you're an opposing team, you don't want to trade away valuable assets to acquire a guy in Kyrie Irving who's disinterested at the moment in playing basketball. There's no need to kind of beset your franchise with additional problems if you don't feel like the guy's even going to be playing. So those are the 3 things that we know. But the reason why, and not to mention, I don't even know if you're the Brooklyn Nets, you may even have to trade Kyrie and assets to someone just for them to take him. And even then, I don't know if that's going to be enough. But the reason why the news in particular with the Philadelphia 76ers and their disinterest in Kyrie Irving is extremely, extremely crucial here and is really substantial is because when we think about what were potentially some of the viable destinations for Kyrie Irving that he would maybe reluctantly be willing to be traded to, well, the Philadelphia 76ers may have been the only option because they've got a disgruntled star and the Nets have a mercurial and equivocal basketball genius who right now is disinterested in playing and being a part of the team. And so if you're Kyrie Irving, you're saying to yourself, okay, if God forbid, worst case scenario, I'm traded to the Philadelphia 76ers, well, Philly is still a major contender in the East. They've got Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, that young core, Doc Rivers. There are worse places to go. I think he would obviously begrudge the move, but I don't think he would be saying to himself, if he woke up tomorrow in a Philadelphia 76ers uniform, this is a terrible situation. I'm not going to win here. I'm going to retire. I don't see that. I could see that with some other teams. If he was traded back to the Cavs, traded to other more, for lack of a better term, destitute types of NBA destinations at the moment. But the Philadelphia 76ers were a viable destination for Kyrie Irving, where I think he'd be willing. He would reluctantly do it, but I think he'd be willing to play and not retire if he was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers. So if Philly isn't all of a sudden recusing themselves from the situation at all, from a potential trade, well, that really crimps the Nets' options moving forward. Really crimps their options moving forward. So again, I still believe that probably in the 11th hour, Kyrie Irving will ultimately get vaccinated. I mean, I think it's very selfish what he's doing right now, not just to his organization, but his teammates and his friends in Kevin Durant and KD. That's not what they signed up for. And he's really doing a big disservice to them. And again, maybe it's wishful thinking on my part. Maybe it's just false hope as a basketball fan that I hope he plays, because not to mention the Brooklyn Nets were the odds-on favorite to win the NBA title this year, again, assuming the entire core was kept in place. But if Kyrie Irving ultimately decides to maintain this stance and not play, it'll be a slap in the face to KD, a slap in the face to James Harden, his organization, his teammates, everyone involved. Joe Tsai, the governing body, came out yesterday in a report by The Athletic that said he was very displeased with Kyrie Irving's 2-week sabbatical last season in the middle of nowhere for no reason. So it's not obviously frustrating. It's extremely disappointing. And quite frankly, it's probably really irritating and frustrating for KD and James Harden. And Steve Nash has been pretty vocal, and his body language has said the story. So now there was an anonymous quote from an anonymous source yesterday from that same article in The Athletic that said that apparently Kyrie Irving's position it's not that he's anti-vaccine. It's more so he wants to be a voice for the voiceless and stand with those that have lost their jobs due to a vaccine mandate being enforced upon them. He's fighting for the plight of others, yet isn't saying anything. He wants to be a voice for the voiceless, but he's not willing to say anything. The irony is that if Kyrie Irving really wants to be more outspoken about this, the NBA's platform is a much greater platform than him being by himself and trying to talk about this stuff. And the other irony is that he was the one that orchestrated this whole move between him and KD joining, between he and KD joining the Brooklyn Nets and having these goals of winning an NBA championship together. And he might be the sole reason why they may not be able to win a championship because of his refusal and unwillingness to get vaccinated. And so he might have to endure the consequences of that, and people will probably blame him and castigate him, and they might even call it poetic justice. I hope he plays. He's a basketball genius when he does. He's got to make a decision, but right now, that was a big blow given the fact that the Philadelphia 76ers were a really viable trade destination. And now all of a sudden, they're recusing themselves. So that's a big blow. Transitioning to the NFL, obviously the story, John Gruden resigning as the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. We know that. But what I want to talk about is the fact that now the NFLPA, the Players Union of the NFL, is requesting the entire chain of emails, the entire email thread between John Gruden and the Washington football team. Now, of course, let me just first say that John Gruden, of course, he was basically forced to resign or be fired, but for optics standpoint, he was given the opportunity by Mark Davis to resign because of the racially insensitive, discriminatory, homophobic, and misogynistic emails that he sent to the owner of the Washington football team, Dan Snyder. And even the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who he had won a Super Bowl with as a head coach, just removed him from their Ring of Honor, which honors the most important people in your franchise's success. The Dallas Cowboys have a Ring of Honor. Almost every single NFL franchise has a Ring of Honor where you honor people that made major contributions to your team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers now just said, nope, John, we recognize what you did on the field. Off the field, this isn't what we stand for. And obviously what he did was appalling. It is repulsive. It's disgraceful, let alone even uttering derogatory and discriminatory and insensitive remarks is intolerable. And it's shameful what he did. It truly is. And this was the only option for him. And it probably reveals a lot more about his true character than what we were led to believe. But it's one thing, again, to make insulting or offhanded remarks in passing or to a friend or a confidant. It's another thing entirely altogether, and I'm not going to touch on this too much. It's another thing entirely altogether to explicitly type out an email and deliberately send that email. An email doesn't automatically send. It saves as a draft. It's in draft form first. You as the individual have to explicitly press the send button for it to be disseminated out. So John Gruden knew exactly what he did. He meant to do it. He was acting in a perverse manner. He knew exactly what he was doing. So that's the bottom line. But here's the interesting thing about this. The Washington football team was already in the news, and Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team, was already in the news because of sexual harassment claims against them, about treatment of women, that the inappropriate conduct towards women that persisted in their organization. So sexual harassment claims were made, and now the entire team is being investigated. And through these investigations that were entirely separate from John Gruden's interactions and from everything that's revolving around John Gruden, which is entirely separate at the moment, now all of a sudden, in that investigation, the Washington football team, that's where they discovered and procured some of these emails that were sent between John Gruden and Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team. So we knew that Dan Snyder was already an awful owner. Now we're adding another layer of complexity. And the reason why this is interesting to me is because clearly, if John Gruden felt that he was communicating with this individual freely in this manner and that he was allowed to behave in this environment, if he felt like this environment fostered and encouraged this type of behavior, then clearly this type of language had always been permitted between he and Dan Snyder. That what else could be revealed through these emails? How far back can we trace this? Because now it's probably going to expose some emails that were either responded or it's sent or had been sent before between he and between him and Mr. Snyder and Dan Snyder, the owner. And it might open up a whole can of worms and kind of thrust us into this further rabbit hole where it might reveal a whole lot more. And it might reveal a lot more about how this type of language was fostered and who else has been using this type of language. It might expose a whole lot more. And we've always known that racism, or at least we've believed that racism was a systemic and an institutionalized issue. And if we go further down this rabbit hole and take a deeper dive at some of these emails, it might corroborate that, and it might expose some legitimate institutionalized racism that's been existent between these individuals and other owners. Who knows what this might expose about some other owners in the NFL? We saw Donald Sterling in the NBA. His mistress secretly, discreetly recorded him uttering racially insensitive remarks and discriminatory statements. And ultimately, the NBA forced him to sell his team. That might give the NFL license to follow suit and demand that Dan Snyder sell his team for a bunch of other reasons why he should have already sold his team, just because he's a bad owner. And again, Donald Sterling was an abominable owner. And so this will give the NFL license to perhaps follow the same suit if they discover that in more emails, there's more information revealed about how these owners have been communicating with each other, how the owners have been communicating with John Gruden. And that type of pervasive hatred and bigotry is intolerable, shouldn't be allowed at all. And again, it just further fosters that kind of insidious behavior. And so I think that that this is a huge story, not just the John Gruden aspect, but the fact that if the NFLPA can get their hands on these emails, well, now we can really trace and see how far back this goes to. Can see how far back this goes to. We all thought that Urban Meyer was in a heap of trouble, right? Just last week, we thought the weight of the world was on Urban Meyer. And sure, his infidelity was shameful, and the fact that he was hypocritical, he probably lost the respect of a lot of, if not all, the players in the locker room, and they probably lost the faith and the trust in him as a person. But with all this John Gruden breaking news, the Urban Meyer story is kind of an afterthought. And of course, listen, he'll have to painfully work through his own personal relationship with his wife and his kids. But from this perspective, that's a lesser story than the John Gruden incident. So I think that we've just scratched the surface on this issue. I think there's going to be a deluge of new information that will be brought to the surface in the next coming days, likely. This is a huge story that I think is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what I think. Transitioning to a slightly happier topic, for a topic that I know people like, and something that a story that I've been following for a bit. LiAngelo Ball, the middle brother in the Ball family, Lonzo, LiAngelo, LaMelo. So the middle brother, LiAngelo, apparently has just signed a G League contract, which means that he's eligible to be drafted in the G League on October 23rd, which is when the draft takes place. He obviously played with the Charlotte Hornets this past summer. And listen, the Charlotte Hornets, I said this before, the Charlotte Hornets, they complimented LiAngelo Ball. They praised him for his efforts in the summer league. A lot of the coaches all were extremely ecstatic about him and extolled his work ethic, the fact that he was showing up to the practice facility 2 hours before every single practice the entire summer, that he was diligent, that he was a hard worker. And they really appreciated everything that he brought to them during that summer league stretch. And the big thing that I think people forget when they're evaluating players is where they are now versus where they can be, versus where their potential is. Because what they're seeing now isn't always going to be the finished product. And that's the biggest problem. You have guys like Jimmy Butler, who, when he entered the NBA out of Marquette, he was known as a defensive specialist. He didn't have any offensive game really in his arsenal. And now he's evolved and he's grown and he's groomed himself into an elite two-way player and an elite offensive player in particular, who's one of the best scorers in the NBA. Draymond Green, drafted in the second round drafted in the second round out of Michigan State several years ago. Well, he was viewed as an undersized big man who's under-athletic. And yet he turned himself into an NBA champion and having a Hall of Fame career as a three-time NBA champion. And he was a crucial piece of the Golden State Warriors' dynasty. So what he entered the NBA as wasn't who he was going to be. That wasn't going to be the final product, the finished product. People forget that LiAngelo Ball is just 22 years old. He's 22. That's younger than Luka Doncic. That's younger than Brandon Ingram. That's younger than Lonzo Ball. And it feels like we've known about LiAngelo Ball just because he and his family have been in the limelight. That's a sneeze. Whew. Excuse me. Almost had to sneeze there. It feels like we've known about LiAngelo Ball and the entire family just because the family's been in the limelight for the last 5 years. But the reality is people don't really know how young LiAngelo Ball is. This is a guy, I mean, maybe what we're seeing was his full potential, but it could be that he's going to improve substantially more. He didn't have stellar numbers in the summer league, 9.5 points, 2 rebounds, shot 37.5% from the floor, 34.5% from the three-point line. But he did have, in his debut, he scored 16 points, 5 of 5 from the three-point line. And listen, we know some of the limitations with his offensive game, but at the end of the day, he's 6'5", and he's 230 pounds. So obviously those numbers didn't land him a spot in the Hornets training camp, but he was signed to the G League draft. So he's got an opportunity to be signed by the Greensboro Swarm, which is the development affiliate of the Charlotte Hornets. So he's got a chance to make the roster. And again, I've said this before. I think the only two teams that would make sense for him to potentially be on are the two teams that feature his brothers. So Lonzo Ball with the Chicago Bulls, so the Chicago Bulls, and of course the Charlotte Hornets with LaMelo Ball. From a talent perspective, he's probably a borderline guy, but because he's not very athletic, he predominantly scores just off catch and shoot opportunities. He's not a huge playmaker, not a great defensive player. But again, he's still 6'5", he's 230 pounds, so he's got the girth, he's got the size, he's got the physicality, and clearly he's got the drive to be great. Whether he gets there, I don't know. But if he can continue to kind of develop his three-point shot, develop defensively, again, that size, that's a pretty versatile size for a shooting guard. It's possible that he could make a roster. And I've said this before as well, that I think the underappreciated aspect of what he brings is that family component. Because I prefer to see him with the Hornets as opposed to the Bulls, because the Bulls with Lonzo, I want Lonzo to be in a fresh environment by himself, give him an opportunity to flourish entirely on his own, away from family, away from distractions. But with the Hornets, I think that he can have a similar effect that Thanasis had on Giannis. Remember when we were talking about Giannis, how Giannis, for the longest time, he kept falling short in the postseason. And yes, his brother was on the team, but their family's just as close as the Ball family. And I think that the presence of Thanasis really benefited Giannis this last postseason, because all the struggles that he had to overcome, having this guy in his corner, constantly cheering for him, constantly praising him and applauding his efforts, I think really provided a huge emotional boost for him that helped bring out the best in Giannis. Their family is just as close. And I think that LiAngelo, again, while LaMelo Ball was already the NBA Rookie of the Year last year, it's not like he really needs it. But at the same time, I do think that LiAngelo Ball can provide a similar boost to LaMelo if he was given an opportunity there. And at the end of the day, they're all hoopers. They're all hoopers. The entire family is. Lonzo loves to play. He doesn't say anything. LaMelo plays with flair and panache, but he's a pretty humble guy. And by the looks of it, it seems like LiAngelo is as well. He doesn't say anything either. So I think that all of those guys should be given a shot. I would love to see it happen. Again, I'm not bailing on him. I'm not like other people. I'm not going to bail on him. I'd love to give him a chance. So I think it could, his presence could improve LaMelo's. I really do. I really do. Back here on Morning Joe, we transition to the MLB postseason. The Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants played Game 4 yesterday at Dodger Stadium. The Dodgers won 7-2, And it's a Game 5 winner take all Game 5 on Thursday tomorrow at Oracle Park. And Walker Buehler pitched for the Dodgers yesterday on 3 days rest. It was the short day rest, the first time in his career that he's pitched in the postseason with just 3 days rest. He went 4 1/3 inning, gave up 1 earned run, but was pretty stellar in his performance. Again, had a pretty tight leash. He was able to work out of a second inning jam where he had runners in the corners with 1 out. So that was kind of a sticky situation for him. But fortunately, the Dodgers bats woke up at the end of the day. Dodgers bats woke up. They had 12 hits, 7 runs. And this is what makes baseball so fascinating, is that in the regular season and even the postseason, momentum is so transient. And every single game, every single new day takes on an identity of its own, an entirely new identity. Because that momentum that you might feel, it's fickle, it's ephemeral, it doesn't last a long time, and there's been no carryover so far from each game, from every single game. You saw the Giants took Game 1 4-0. They've got all the momentum. They're playing Game 2 at home. Dodgers bats couldn't do anything. Giants hit 3 home runs in Game 1. Game 2, Dodgers win 9-2. All of a sudden, they can hit again. They have 11 hits, and it's the Giants that are stumbling and sputtering offensively. Then Game 3, you think the Dodgers have seized all the momentum. They're returning back to Dodger Stadium, and the Giants win a defensive battle, 1-0 win. All of a sudden, the Dodgers bats just couldn't produce. And then they followed that up when it seemed like the Giants had regained the momentum. Game 4, Dodgers bats explode again, and they win 7-2. So it's been so unpredictable to have the Dodgers being shut out in 2 of the 4 games. And then the other 2 games, they're averaging 8 runs per game in 2 games. And then 0 runs in the other 2. So the concern that I have about the Dodgers is which Dodgers team will show up. Because the Dodgers are a much more explosive offensive team than the Giants. And since Game 1, the Giants haven't exploded offensively. Their offense hasn't been that electric against the Dodgers since Game 1. And even in Game 1, the Giants only had 5 hits, but 3 of them were for home runs. So they've relied solely on the home run ball. In Game 3, Evan Longoria hit 1 home run. Dodgers still had about 4 or 5 hits, but at the end of the day, they came up short. So there hasn't been a single lead change in any of the games, which means that the first team to strike first has won all the games in this series. So Game 3, listen, I thought that the Dodgers should have won Game 3, if not for extenuating weather circumstances where for the first time in several months, LA decided to have gusts of 20-mile-an-hour winds to keep certain home run balls in the park like it normally should have been. Gavin Lux's 9th inning home run, well, his at-bat should have been a home run. In fact, they looked at the stats. They said that out of 62 times they've seen a ball exit with that type of velocity, it would have been a home run. But because of the 20-mile-an-hour gust of winds, it kept it in the park. And so it was an out by the warning track. But the thing is, again, any other day of the year, that's considered a home run. But the Dodgers offense is so much more explosive than the Giants, but it hasn't been consistent. And that's been the problem. You look at this Dodgers lineup from 1 to 8, it's a Hall of Fame lineup. It's not only an all-star lineup, it's a Hall of Fame lineup. Literally, Chris Taylor was coming off the bench when Max Muncy was in the starting lineup versus you compare it to the Giants, and they've just been all year a little bit more consistent. They've got really steady all-star caliber players along with some all-stars, Chris Bryant, Brandon Crawford, Evan Longoria, Buster Posey's been around forever. Brandon Belt, when he was playing, obviously he's injured now. Same with Max Muncy for the Dodgers. very steady, stable, consistent guys. And that's been the difference is the Giants have gotten some slightly more consistent production out of those guys versus the Dodgers. Their all-star lineups, one night they produce, one night they can't get any contact on the ball. And so the simple question is, will the Dodgers be on in game 5? Which I believe that they will be, but of course, it's only fitting that after 162 regular season games, after 4 postseason games, once again, it comes down to one final game 5. One final game. The Giants all year in 162 regular season games were one game better than the Dodgers. We're one game a little bit more consistent than the Dodgers. In fact, when you look at the totality of the matchups this year, the Giants and the Dodgers faced off 19 times this year. And it was separated. They were separated by 2 runs in 19 games. That's how even they were. Giants 107 wins. Dodgers 106 wins. Separated by 2 games. And of course, listen, it's fitting that the Giants, who had one game better, will host one final matchup between these two teams this year. And I think the winner of this game is going to move on to win the World Series. I think ultimately it will be the Dodgers that are able to prevail. I just have a feeling that they're in their bag a little bit more right now. And again, I thought that the Giants, after they won game 3, if they were going to close out this Dodgers team, it would have to be in game 4. They would have to take that opportunity and win in game 4, because I think the Dodgers right now, they're saying to themselves, we should have beaten them 3 out of the 4 games. We are the better team. And I think the fact that the Dodgers were able to overcome that 3-1 deficit last year against the Braves in the NLCS, I think the fact that they won the World Series last year, they were able to get over that emotional hurdle, I think was absolutely huge for them emotionally, psychologically, that I think it will carry over into game 5. And I think that all the pressure, as much as we want to say, oh, the pressure's on this Dodgers team to win, I think that in a lot of ways there's more pressure on the Giants because of how spectacular of a season they've had. The fact that they're at home playing this game in front of their crowd. And I think that the Dodgers are ultimately going to prevail 3-2. It's going to be a dogfight that's going to go till the very end. I think the Dodgers will win 3-2 heading into the bottom of the 9th inning. It will rely on Kenley Jansen to close out the Giants in a raucous crowd and a hostile environment, because I think Justin Turner is going to hit a solo shot like in the 7th or 8th inning to give the Dodgers the lead. That just seems to be what happens. I can't wait for it, but make no mistake, game 5 will be a dogfight. It will go till the very end. It will absolutely go into the very end. And I think that because the Dodgers have kind of regained that momentum back, I think that ultimately they'll take this one. They'll take this one. Hope so. Certainly hope so. Ending a couple minutes early today, but my final topic of the day, my Malkins moments, have 3 great Malkins moments for you. The first one, huge shout out to Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has accumulated 1,860 total yards. That is more total yards on the season through the first 5 games than 18 other teams in the NFL. Lamar Jackson by himself has had more total yards than the Falcons, the Panthers, the Bengals, the Broncos, the Lions, the Colts, the Bears, the Texans, the Dolphins, the Patriots, the Jets, the Seahawks, the Washington football team, the San Francisco 49ers, the Green Bay Packers, the Steelers, the Saints, and the Jaguars. Yes, you heard that right. Lamar Jackson's got more total yards than 18 other NFL organizations through the first 5 weeks. That's unheard of. And we just saw him on full display coming back from 13 points down against the Indianapolis Colts to beat the Colts in overtime, 31-25 on Monday Night Football a couple of days ago. He's in the MVP discussion right now. He's sensational. I love his attitude. He's obviously an electric football player, but he's got a burning desire to be great, which is an innate skill that you can't teach. And I just love watching him play. And this stat is absolutely sensational. Second, Malkin's moment. Cristiano Ronaldo, he breaks the hat trick record. Ronaldo breaks the record for the most men's international hat tricks as he scored his 10th as he achieved his 10th hat trick in a win over Luxembourg with Portugal yesterday. It's amazing. Cristiano Ronaldo is still playing at age 38, 39 at such an elite high level. The guy, first of all, is a stud-looking individual. He's a stud of a human being, let alone a talent. And he just continues to defy age, just like Tom Brady and Messi and LeBron, all these guys. But Ronaldo has just been sensational for not only Portugal internationally, Manchester United. It's great to see him back there. But big shout out to Cristiano Ronaldo. That is an absolutely fantastic stat that he's blessed us all with. 10 times he scored a hat trick. He's had a hat trick in a game internationally. That's amazing. And finally, in the MLB postseason, Freddie Freeman became the first player in Braves history, the Atlanta Braves history, to hit a go-ahead home run in the 8th inning or later in a series-ending win, according to ESPN Stats and Information. That's sensational. The Atlanta Braves just knocked off the Milwaukee Brewers in the NLDS yesterday in 4 games. They won Game 4 last night, 5-4, thanks to a solo shot by Freddie Freeman in the bottom of the 8th inning. They've now advanced to their second straight NLCS, and they've now earned back-to-back trips to the NLCS for the first time since a 5-year streak ended in 1999. Of course, the Braves lost to the Dodgers last year in 7 games. They led 3-1, but the Dodgers ultimately rattled off 3 straight to win. But major shout out to Freddie Freeman, who's already won an MVP, who's a tremendous player and a potential borderline Hall of Fame baseball player as well. He's certainly making his case for that. That's all the time that I got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. Mondays and Wednesday mornings, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter at morning_Joe_ or at Jonah Malkin on Twitter, JMalk97 on Instagram, and Jonah Malkin on TikTok. Thank you so much. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.